Good afternoon or good morning, I guess. We are on the second day of the session, Wednesday, January 7th. We are going to spend some time today with Agency of Agriculture, food market updates. We're going to start out with General Counsel Steve Collier. We'll probably have Secretary Tevitz in when he frees himself up from other committees, and wide-ranging discussion. I think you might have a presentation or whatever, or
you can call it that.
yeah, okay. Absolutely. So, sir, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. It's great to see you all. Happy New Year, everyone. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. What I was planning to do, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you'd like, but there are some, we've been talking to your chair and also to the chair of the House Ag Committee, and we're hoping to, as we ordinarily do, to propose some housekeeping, some language for your committee bills for us to consider. A lot of it is very general, sort of basic updates, and some of it is more substantive and important. So as we're planning, if you're okay, we don't have the language is mostly done, but it's not yet been shared, but planning to provide you a sort of an overview of what we're hoping to accomplish. And
That'd be helpful.
is that okay?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
So I'll start with the one that, at least in my opinion, is probably the most important among the housekeeping items for this session, and that's an effort to restore the zoning exemption for agriculture. So probably all of you know that back in May of 2025, the Supreme Court issued a decision based on a half-an-acre duck farmer in Essex Junction, which basically overturned the standard, long-standing understanding that towns cannot regulate agriculture through zoning. That had been widely understood, widely accepted, widely applied, but the Supreme Court construed it differently than the understanding had been. So in other words, if you were a farm subject to the REPs, the longstanding belief was towns could not separately zone. So the Agency of Agriculture has many requirements, but towns couldn't step in and do the same thing. The Supreme Court, in its decision, decided that that was incorrect based on its reading of the statute. And it said that the only thing that towns couldn't regulate are specifically the things that are mentioned in the required agricultural practices. So you all know the required agricultural practices are rules mostly related to water quality that farmers have to comply with. Supreme Court said that towns can't regulate those limited things, but not more broadly all of the agricultural practices. That always been construed that quote farming includes a lot of agricultural practices, and it always been considered that towns could not zone those. So the Supreme Court upended that. We made some efforts late in the session to try to put a stay on that, but it was right at the end of the term. I think we tried to do something when we came back for a veto session, but it just wasn't possible to get anything done in that short period of time. So we've been working very closely with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, since they obviously are interested partners in this. We've also been talking closely to a number of farm organizations. And what we really wanted to do was come to you with consensus language that all of those groups supported. We didn't get all the way there, but we got pretty close. And so what we're going to do is ask you to restore the exemption, but we're also going to ask you to tweak it a little bit to compromise with the League of Cities and Towns. And they mostly agree that farming should not be zoned by towns, but they would like to carve out an area where they could regulate farming in downtowns, village centers, and plant growth areas. And they'll tell you they have good reasoning for it. We don't agree with it just because, especially when it comes to plant growth areas, because to us that also equals existing farms. And so, given the delicacy of farming in Vermont and our constant loss of Vermont farmland, we're really reticent to do anything that could drive out a viable farm. And not only drive out a viable farm that's operating wherever it's operating, but also many new and beginning farmers have to start small necessarily because of the cost of land, because of the cost of inputs. So we don't want to do anything to stop anyone from growing food in the state who's able to, but they have to have enough land to reasonably do it. They can't be doing it, in an area where it can't be supported by the land base. So we've got a litany of things that we'll talk to you about that, but it's basically restoring it like it was, but giving towns a little more leeway, and being a little bit clearer about exactly what qualifies as a farm and what a town can regulate. Already a farm could regulate farming that didn't meet the thresholds in the RAPs. So we're going to talk about adjusting those thresholds a little bit. And so, but we're very pleased. The league was wonderful to work with. We met with their board. We met with them many times. The farm groups understandably are also very invested. They want us to go a little farther than we are going, but we're going where we are because we value that consensus with Vermont League of Cities and Towns. And we also we expect that the government operations committees will also be invested in this. And we think it's important to have the league's partnership from that community too. So we'll be talking, I think, a lot about that this session, but I do think it's really important. And the hazard to farms is there's many reasons, but the biggest one is that as the law currently stands, towns can actually zone out farming. That's never been allowed. Like right now, a town can say, you know what, we're going to designate certain areas where you cannot have farms. It's never been true in Vermont, and we don't want it to be. And the other piece is duplicative and potentially conflicting regulation. So if you have our regulations plus municipal regulations, and especially for farms, and there are many who are in more than one town, they could have different regulations and different lands they have, which could get just very confusing, very onerous. And we all know the economic viability, in my personal opinion, is the biggest threat to farming. And every time we layer on another requirement, another restriction, another cost, we're adding to that. So we obviously need to have farms be reasonably regulated, but we don't need multi-layers of regulations. In our opinion, if farms need to be regulated in a certain way, that should be through us, and that should be done uniformly throughout the state, not patchwork and a bunch of different municipal zoning regulations. So that's the kind of big ticket item, I would say. I don't know if there are any questions about that. Or
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The city planned expansion part of that 3 triumvirate that you had. I think that's important. And I think it's very important because other than wetlands and floodplains, anything can be expansion for towns and cities. So I think that's a big stumbling block that I could see that I would be hesitant on agreeing with VLCT.
I like what you're saying.
I mean, you know, I was on the board at the time, so but that's a huge stumbling block, and I'm curious as their willingness to acquiesce on that particular part.
They'll do a much better job at explaining their position than I will.
They're coming in when Linda? VLCT, I think VLCT.
They're coming in early next week.
Okay, sure, yeah.
But we agree with you. Essentially, our position is simply that anywhere where agriculture is reasonable and viable, and we want to be able to allow it, that doesn't mean it'll happen. The reality is, in more densely populated areas, including planned growth areas, potentially, farmers often sell their land, which is good for the farm, not necessarily good for the state. So the more densely developed an area is, the more likely it is to not remain farming. But if you can farm there and you can be successful there and you can have an incredible roadside farm stand in that location because it's densely populated, great. So we just want to maintain that flexibility and don't want to be pushing viable farming out wherever it can exist in the state. And, the league they have to worry about housing. They have to worry about how to expand. They have to worry about, neighborly relations. So they've got their own, and they've been wonderful to work with. I will not credit, they were very thoughtful about this. We happen to have disagreed, but that said, on the majority of the state, they agree with us that towns should not be, the vast majority of the state, it might be 98% of the state or 95%. But part of the problem with planned growth areas is those can change. And I think you were talking about that. We're talking about undefined, movable maps, and we don't want that. And it's never been the case. Like, towns have never had the authority to tell a farm, you can't farm here, as long as there was the ability to do that. So it would be a substantial sea change. And I don't blame them for asking for it, but I hope the legislature will that there's no need to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So prior to the Supreme Court decision, farming had, in essence, total immunity from any kind of local zoning regulations, right?
Correct. If you met the threshold that you were covered by the required agriculture.
Well, yes.
Yeah, so if you
the
had 3
RAPs
chickens,
came into play for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm feeling the same way Senator Major is. I'd like to just go back to the way it was, period. I don't believe in giving anybody authority to put their thumb down on farmers. Just me.
Alex, again, a welcome senator.
When will we have the language that's proposed?
It's provided that your chair in your committee is amenable. I hope to share that early next week.
Okay, absolutely.
Because I'll have questions.
Sure, of
More
course. Yeah,
details.
yeah, the
You'll
language.
come in,
Of course.
come in.
Oh, of course, yeah, as much as we, yeah, we're happy to talk about it.
And are you gonna have that comparison language, of what was and what is?
Yeah, we'll talk about the history. You know, I've researched it as far as I could go without going to a law library with those older statutes, and the exemption's been in place since at least 1987. So there's a more recent version that's on the books now, but I'm not aware of it ever being allowed in Vermont. I don't know for sure, but Act 250, you know, was kind of the first statewide zoning.
Yeah.
And that was enacted in 1970, and farming was exempt from that. In fact, Act 250 was largely created to protect farming.
Right.
And it was exempt from that. It's been exempt from zoning at least since 1987. I think I'm not sure when zoning really took off in Vermont, but it's, you know, there's still a lot of places with no zoning. So I have no reason to believe that towns have ever been allowed to zone agriculture, maybe before 1987. I don't know for sure.
And you mentioned farming groups. I'd like to get a better sense of who you talk to from them.
So the Vermont Farm Bureau,
Okay.
NOFA, Rural Vermont, BDPA, the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance, and there were several other groups that were kind of participants in the call too. But
Yeah, I had a conversation just in the hallway with NOFA yesterday, and they're certainly aligned with your way of thinking. So,
yeah, I think they want to know a little more than we do, which
Yeah.
is completely understandable. I think we're, we've committed to a partnership with the leagues because we believe their input is going to be influential as well. And so we tried to narrow the area of disagreement so that we'd have hopefully the best chance of getting consensus among the legislators.
Okay. So while we're kind of on that schedule, and I know you're going to tell us about, kind of your outline about it, but one of the things that we brought up yesterday, and I don't think it's something that we'll be able to do anywhere near small, but we're going to start the conversations about protecting prime ag lands from solar development, any type of development. I know we understand that, Vermont used to have a lot of pasture land, and the reason why it was pasture land is because it couldn't be turned into farmland, so to say, cropland. And cows don't pasture anymore like they have in the past unless they're in cabin. And, so there, you've got a lot of land out there, sometimes just across the fence from, a good farm field versus something that is not a good farm field because it's really not meant to be there. And then we'd like to be able to say, okay, well, no, you're not gonna put those solar fields in this nice, farm field, but we have this pasture land next door. So we're gonna somehow kind of start to thread that needle a little bit. It's very touchy because now you're starting to tell farmers what they can do with their land. And we understand that, they own the land, all of that stuff, but farmland is at a premium. Those fields have been, I don't think there's very many major farm fields that still aren't farmed today, even though we have less farmers. And so to protect that growth potential of these farms in the state of Vermont, I think is very important that we start to look at, even in housing. There's just, the land is precious. They don't make any more of it. And so at some point in time, we're going to get that off the ground. I don't know what direction we're going to do that in, but
No, that's good to know. Thank you. And there are a lot of people who have interest in this, and it's a very rife political issue.
yes,
Because of renewable private property interests that you talked about, and also the desire to have more renewable energy. Farmland is one of our most precious resources. The theory with solar is that we don't lose it. Theory is that we maintain it so that it can be used later. That's a wonderful theory. some people refer to as a legal fiction. Some people say it will happen, but the idea is, and it's possible that the land that's used for solar can be restored to farmland in the future. And that is a possibility. And that's what our agency with the current legal authority that we have works to do. We're involved in the certificate of public good process between the Public Utility Commission, and we work to preserve agricultural soils. And with solar, though, there's something that's in statute which says if you have a solar field, that land remains Primax soil. So the idea is you're protecting that Primax soil indefinitely, legally. The question, and when a developer puts solar panels in a field, part of their certificate of public good is they promise to decommission the site at some point in the future. That's the potential legal fiction. It's never happened. A solar field is that solar panels have never come out. They probably will at some point because they'll probably be replaced by something better. But the question is, does that go back to a farm field or does it go to some other kind of energy development? No one really knows. So there is some solace, and right now anything that has solar on it on Primax soil, it is still legally protected. But of course, laws can change in the future. Who knows what will happen? And the more that you pepper farmland with solar panels, the more that you make the other land that's left more valuable and increase cost. So there's a lot of factors to balance in that, but it's a really important topic. I don't think we've gotten it right, but I don't know how we'll be able to do
Well,
it.
we're gonna keep on putting some thoughts to it and keep on asking the questions and keep on bringing in people to further that conversation. And if I could tell you that I could have a clear path of how we're gonna go down through there, but we're certainly gonna have some discussions about it.
There's some neat ideas out there, whether they're politically viable or not, I have no idea, but there are some. It's keeping in mind, at least in my opinion, the most important crisis for farmers is ongoing economic viability.
Right.
You're dealing with commodity prices input costs that you can't control. You don't set your own commodity price for most farmers in Vermont, and you have to face natural disasters. We have 3 years in a row of really significant natural disasters, and you have increasing land prices, and you have our farmers getting older and fewer coming in. We really need to do something to restore the sanctity of farming in Vermont. And that's not something you can compel. It's something you have to entice. And so fortunately, we have a proud history in Vermont, and we have many people who want to farm. And when you see people who want to farm, like we just saw a dairy farmer in Shoreham, there's a news story that maybe some of you saw it, who, because of the drought, he couldn't buy his feed and he sold his cows. Like, that's happening. It's been happening for decades. Anything the state of Vermont can do to try to allow farmers who are good at it and want to keep doing it to be able to keep tilling the land instead of using it for something else. Like, that seems like the threshold. To me, that's the most important thing we can do, is enable those who want to farm and are good at it to be able to. But it's not easy. I mean, there's a lot of factors that are completely outside of government control and probably should be, but there are things we can do to help.
Keyword good.
Yeah.
Well, on we go.
Okay, so the other ones are a little bit more perfunctory, but so I don't know if you are with some stores are thinking about and are installing electronic shelf tags in their stores. One of the things we do is regulate through our weights and measures department. We regulate, not department, sorry, but for our weights and measures section, we regulate unit pricing, which is the amount that you put on a label for per weight or measure. So how much is something by pound? How much is something by ounce? So that shoppers can comparison shop. And so they know if there's things in different size bottles, they can look at it and say, oh, this one's cheaper. It's not this much smaller bottle. It's also less expensive. And we also regulate stores to ensure that they're accurately charging the prices and you enforce on that. So as anyone who's been to a grocery store knows that things don't ring up always as they say on the shelf. So one of our functions is to do that, to make sure the stores are accurately charging people. Most of them are, but there are some people who don't do it as business practice because they make more money if they don't. And that's rare, but it does happen. So anyway, those are some of our functions: the retail pricing and unit pricing. Our statutes in that area are very outdated. The unit pricing statute is over 50 years old and it just needs to be updated. It's confusing. I mean, I'm a reasonable lawyer. I won't go any further than that, but I have trouble understanding it. And so it's hard to ask people to do things that they can't understand. So we just want to update it. So we want to reform it, bring it, modernize it, make it better. But also there's a new thing that a lot of people are worried about with electronic shelf tags, which can be great. Because a lot of times the reason that prices are wrong at the register is the shelf tags haven't caught up with the register. You know, you download something in your system for your cash register, but your shelf tags haven't caught up. That's where a lot of the errors can come. So with electronic shelf tags, you can be having the same system. So when you're changing at the register, you're also changing on the shelf. That's great. But another thing you can do though with that is something called dynamic pricing, where you can actually at any moment of the day change your pricing based on demand, based on what you think you can get for it. So what we don't want is anybody in the store taking an item off the shelf that says it's $2 and then get to the register and it's $4. Because you could do that with dynamic pricing. So I don't think that's controversial, but we just want to make sure that it doesn't happen. And so what we'll propose is that you can't change your prices while you're in operation. You can do it at night and you can charge whatever you want. It's just that you can't change it so that it's inaccurate when somebody takes it off the shelf. So there will be a lot of language there, but it's basically just modernizing, updating.
Did we, as legislature mandate some changes in that? It seems to be, did we pass something on that? No, just something you were just doing yourself.
I don't remember anything recently, but there may have been that I'm not thinking of, but not anything broad scale, but there's always little tweaks here and there.
Okay.
So that's, no questions on that? Okay. Sorry, notes here. So I'll raise this, briefly. I guess I won't. This is a big issue. Neonic treated seeds. I think it's better to talk about it a different day. This is just, but we will be talking about that and some plans that we have about that. That's an ongoing issue, but I don't think we plan on proposing language. I think we just want to explain where we are, but we'll do that another time.
Fair enough.
So this is a really, simple change that we just discovered because of something that happened this summer. But in current law, a milk buyer, so someone who's buying milk from a farmer, can't cancel their milk contract termination without giving the farmer a right to a hearing in front of the Secretary of the Agency of Agriculture. So basically, if you have a contract with a farmer to buy milk, there's some statutory protection that doesn't allow the milk buyer to do that without cause. Essentially, there's different standards, it's either sanitation or other reasonable grounds. But if a milk buyer does that, the farmer can contest it, and the Secretary of the Agency of Agriculture has the decision to decide makes the decision about whether or not the grounds are reasonable, and then that can get appealed to court. There's a provision in that which basically says that if a milk buyer cuts off a farmer, then the decision is stayed until that hearing. So basically the idea of that is you hold the farmer harmless until the Secretary makes the decision. But there's an error in that statute that it says if the milk buyer, I think it actually says purchaser, the milk purchaser requests a hearing, then it's stayed. That's an error in the statute. A milk purchaser is never going to ask for a hearing to contest its own decision. So it's just we just found the error. It's an old statute, it just needs to be corrected so that we've been, I think, implementing it that way, but it's not what the law says. So when we tell somebody you have to wait, they can reasonably say right now, no, I know.
Yeah.
So we just want to fix that. It's changing, I think, one word, maybe two.
How old the law was that?
I think it's from the 60s, maybe. And
There's big mistakes there too. Look.
It's pretty old. Yeah. The old laws are interesting. Say it's 60s. There were a lot fewer from that. There was some good to that. No questions about that? I assume. So we have a farm to school grant program, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, where we try to get schools to buy more local farm agricultural products. That right now is set up as a grant program where we can give grants to facilitate that. We've been doing this for a long time. There's some aspects of that, which would be better accomplished through a contract than through a grant. Specifically providers who sometimes we hire providers to try to educate schools about how to do it, how to get them more familiar with how to do it. And that really should be done through a contract with the state because you can set different terms and conditions through a contract than you can through a traditional grant where you're just giving money. So we just want to tweak that language to make it clear that in that program, we can accomplish our objectives through either contract or grant. So that's really all we want to do is add that ability. Arguably, we could just do it now and say grant is contract, but we'd rather be express about it. So that's a perfect housekeeping change, I think. Won't go to any questions. So in chapter 215 in the water quality section, we have some ongoing farmer mandatory training requirements that have been in place since the water quality standards were significantly ratcheted up back in 2015. These farmers were required to educate farmers for free about the requirements of the REPs, but the REPs were instituted in 2015, and we've provided, I forgot the numbers, but thousands of trainings. We believe that farmers are educated about the REPs now, but these ongoing mandatory requirements are there. It's pretty administratively burdensome for farmers to have to continue to do it, and for us to have to do it. We do because it's in statute. But what we'd like to do is take away the mandatory requirements, but give us discretion to require training when it's necessary. Our belief is that farmers understand the REPs now. They don't always follow them. They usually do, but they don't always. And when they don't, we have ability to take enforcement action. But what we'd like to do is just not make everybody do training they don't need. And so that's the request there.
Is it the same REPs? You're just continuing to train to the same standard? I mean,
Well, there's a lot of different areas you can train in water quality. So there's a variety of trainings that we can do. And Laura DePietro, our water quality director, is much more familiar with the specific trainings we do. And we very much believe in education, and we shouldn't be stopping education in any way. It's just that these mandatory requirements, like there are a lot of novel things that happen, and I think we'd be better off talking about how to implement those than how to just meet the mandatory requirements that are in statute now. So, but I think I'm going from memory, but maybe we've had 32,000 farmer attended trainings, which obviously is a lot of repeat farmers for that sort of number, but we just don't feel like the statutory mandate made sense at the time when it was all new. But right now, it just feels like it's kind of a waste of people's time.
because you make it sound like once a student learns the multiplication tables, if you try to just keep training them, that there isn't anything more to learn. If you understand them, you understand them.
Well, Senator Cotmore, I still forget them, so you might be disproving me. Okay. Well, times 11. Think about that one for a second.
Okay.
So yes, exactly. We don't want to do things that we don't think are productive.
Yeah,
But we
right.
do it because it's in law. But we
Okay.
think there are better ways, and we'd rather train people who need it rather than just and also most importantly for the farmers, we don't want to make them attend trainings that are a waste of their time. So yes, and somebody who knows the multiplication tables, it's a complete waste of time. So this is very simple. There's currently in statute, we're a member of something called the Interstate Pest Control Compact, which was a way for states to work together to control pests. It was great while it existed, but it dissolved in 2013. So in statute, we're still a member of it. We're supposed to be providing an annual report about it. It doesn't exist, so it feels like it's time to get rid of that. Shit's happening. Because of your help, 2 years ago, I think it was, maybe it was 2024, I think, we now have the ability to provide pesticide exams for online. So as you probably know, if you're applying certain kinds of pesticides, you have to go through training to show that you're qualified that we administer. And we used to have to haul people into the office, and some people are not even in the state because companies get hired, and sometimes they come to Vermont to do it from not in the state. So it's a real challenge for some folks to do it. And we now can do it online, or we'll shortly be able to do it online. We have the contract signed. So there's just there's some things we want to streamline about our testing process. We want to just consolidate some categories, make it a little bit simpler, standardize who pays for the test when, and also take away, right now, if you don't pass the test, I think it's in your fourth try, you have to wait a year. And there's arguments for and against that, but we don't think it's particularly helpful, especially once a company's already hired somebody and you have somebody ready to go. And we don't think we need to have the cap on exam taking, but that's something that we can all discuss. So we'd like to just change the testing requirements a little bit to streamline them, to make our online process a little bit easier. We still provide testing opportunities in the office too, but people who want to do it online will be able to do that, and we expect that most will, because it's a lot easier for them. Any questions about that? No. And the last one is the seed law. So there's a chapter on seed law and how we regulate it. And there's also a uniform seed law that all the states are a member of an association about regulating seed. And like with many of these kinds of endeavors, the idea is to try to get standardization across the country so that when you're selling seed or fertilizer or a range of things, that hopefully the state's laws are aligned so that we're not making it more difficult for interstate commerce. Our seed law, we just want to update it to be more aligned to the uniform seed law. So there will be quite a number of changes, but the whole impetus is to try to get aligned with what the uniform seed law proposes from the association that we're a member of.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that's it for the housekeeping issues that we're hoping to propose.
At some point in time as well, I don't want to get into a feud of a bitter lawsuit that seems to be going on about tile drains and stuff like that. Or are we ever going to wade into any of that stuff, or are we going to wait to see what the property does over Aston County, or is there any need to even be talking about any of tile drains and pollutants and all of that stuff? Or is it already precedent in law? Is there any need for us to delve into that?
I have a lot to say about that. I'm not sure right now.
And nothing has to be said now. So
Yeah.
just put it out there as far as we have plenty on our plate this year. But we will tackle anything that is, I think one of the greatest things that I love about this committee is, that they are committed to protecting farmers in the state of Vermont. And so if we've got to be bold and take any approaches to do what we've tasked each other with, then we're willing to do that. So it is nothing that needs to be solved today or whatever, but if we can play a role in it to protect farmers, we're willing to do that.
Well, and that's incredible to hear. And I do think it's a really significant issue. I don't think it's about one farm. It's not.
No.
It's about tile drain.
Right.
And my expectation, and this is just a hunch, I don't know this, but I believe that the legislature will likely be asked to increase regulation on tile drain this year. I may be wrong about that. But if I were to guess, the whole lawsuit is a prelude to ask for legislative action to more strictly regulate tile drain. So I think that request will be made because it's not regulated right now under federal law or state law, provided farmers are properly following the nutrient management plan. Farmers, what they spread in their fields is very closely regulated, but stormwater under the Clean Water Act is exempt from regulation. Whether it's coming off the top of your land, this is my opinion now, coming off the top of your land, or whether it's coming through tile drain. The question is whether or not when you spread things onto your land, whether or not you're properly doing that, and that is what farms have to do. If they are properly doing that, then whether the water is coming off the top, water's always coming off. You don't stop the flow of water. You can control what's in the water to some extent. And what farmers have to do is that's what they have to do, properly manage their nutrients so that when there is runoff, which is inevitable, it's at the proper rate of application. And if you have oversaturated soils with phosphorus, for example, that's one of the reasons you have to test your soil. And we can reduce the application rates that are permissible, but that's the way farm water quality is regulated. Nobody's going to a tile drain and taking test tubes, testing them to regulate farms, because that is not what's required. What's required is that the farms properly apply materials onto their fields. So it's a novel attempt, which will likely have some significant sympathy in this building. It's a powerful emotional case that's being made. And I think probably you'll be asked to weigh in on whether or not there should be greater legal controls on tile drain, which impacts many Vermont farms and is a widely accepted agricultural practice throughout the country. And I think for decades, and there's some real value to it. There are sometimes if you don't do it correctly, there are some concerns, but in general, it's considered a conservation practice if it's done correctly, because the water filters through the soil, which the soil then collects a lot of the nutrients rather than it coming on the top. So when it's properly utilized, and Heather Darby, Josh Faulkner from UVM, I don't remember if they were in this committee last year or not, but they've done a nice presentation on it before. There are differing theories about tile drain, but the idea that it in and of itself is a pipe coming out from a factory, in my opinion, does not have any legal basis. So I suspect it'll be an issue one way or not this session, but I may be wrong. It's something that certain groups have wanted for a long time, and we'll see what happens.
Do other states regulate it?
Well, we regulate it. We just don't regulate the way that is being asked to be regulated.
Understood. Do other states?
All states are subject to federal law, and the federal law creates the standard. Vermont has much more, the whole thing that the Agency of Agriculture does is above and beyond federal law. We regulate when you're not discharging to water. That's when the federal law regulates when you do discharge the water. We say you can't discharge the water, so we have that whole universe. That applies in every state, and the Clean Water Act is the same in every state. I haven't specifically researched state laws to see if anybody else regulates tile specifically. I'm not aware of any. I have looked at federal cases to see how other federal courts have interpreted this, and very clearly and federal law is that there's an exemption for stormwater or for irrigation runoff. And but if you're not managing your property correctly, then you're not keeping the nutrients where they're supposed to be. To me, that's a legitimate potential claim when you're oversaturating your land and the water's coming out, whether it's over the top or I think through tile. And I haven't seen a court that said that, but I think it's a reasonable position that if you're not managing your land appropriately, and because of that, there's discharges through your tile, I think that could arguably be a Clean Water Act violation because you're not following your nutrient management plan. But the fact that it's coming through a tile or that it's coming off the top is not a differentiation in state law. Federal or state law currently.
Okay.
And I'm not aware of a good policy reason to do that other than it's, you can, big farms a lot of people don't like big farms, and that may be the case, but big farms get big because they can't survive being small. So yeah.
Well, good. Main questions. Anything else that you guys would like to tell us today?
Do you want a quick update on the drought survey?
Absolutely.
All right, so maybe Abby and I can give you a quick. We've had some results of a preliminary survey that we had out this fall, and so. Well, good morning, all look wonderful. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Just expect to get anything you want.
We'll do a check-in the week before town meeting and see how they're all looking. So it's great to be with you. Anson Tebbets, Agency of Agriculture Food Markets, Abby Willard's with me as well, and Nicole Dubuque, Operations Director, and also you met Steve earlier. So just a quick update on it. It was in every county. And some counties were worse than other counties as far as the drought this year. So I just want to share some results that we have for you. We put out a survey to our farm community. We got about 200 responses. It closed the middle of December. So Abby and her team are going through that data, and they got some preliminary data they can share with you. About 79,000 acres impacted because of the drought. And the estimated losses from this survey about $15.9 million. 50% of the respondents said this was the worst drought they had ever experienced. And it goes to all sectors. You're going to see some information even on maple. You're going to see some stuff on, dairy with grass-based operations, but also forage and so forth. You're going to have fruits and vegetables impacted. You had a number of folks that were, hauling water, particularly down your way. Your way had people hauling water, drilling wells, and it has intended significant impact. And this comes on the heels of 23-24 of the severe weather with rain. And just an overarching, I think we're in a time and a place where some may be wanting our farmers to do more. And I think this is a time that they got a lot on their plate now, dealing with a lot of things that are really out of their control. And the weather being the top one that's impacted over the last 3 years. But you got some in around this building that wanted to continue to ask them to do more. And I think we're at a point where they're doing all right. We ever asking them too much of those, and sometimes we're asking, but they're doing their share. They're complying with the regulations. Sometimes people look sideways. The industry does that way, does that. But they're all doing their share to help our communities, employ people, feed us. So it's one of those times, I think, in Vermont that with everything going on in the world, if it's issues with tariffs and trade, trying to navigate the way through that, natural disaster. So I think we're approaching this session as, Steve talked about the municipal, that needs to be fixed because that's not making it easier for people to farm. We just want to, make some tweaks. Farming is not, shouldn't be in every place in the state. That's not what we're saying, but there are places it should be allowed to continue, and it should be allowed places where maybe there's a few acres you need to farm. So I think we're kind of in that space. But back to the drought. I think Abby's got some slides she would love to share with you, and maybe she can share the table up here with me, and we can go through that.
Sounds good. Okay. Morning.
Morning.
How are you all?
Good. How are you, Abby?
Just put your chair up here. Abby Willard, Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. Nice to see you again.
Well,
So yeah, Secretary Tevitt said we have some preliminary results from the survey that we launched this fall and that closed on December 15th. I'll say it's not finalized. We haven't gone through all this data to prepare the final report, but we have put the survey responses in what's called Power BI, which is like a very powerful data manipulation tool so that we can sort and search through the data and kind of in all various different scenarios that we want to look at. So we could look at like geographic implications or business size or primary business type. So some of that work is here. You'll get to see some of the early stages of that, but also note that it's not finished. So this is not yet available on our website in the Power BI form, and our final report on the drought survey and the collective impacts on the industry is not yet finalized, but we hope we'll have it done in the next couple of weeks. And happy to come back in and share that with you then and make sure you see the full final results. But, Secretary Tevitt started to share a little bit about some of the big picture impacts. So we heard from 200 different ag businesses from every county across the state, representing 110 different towns. As we shared earlier in the process, that it's a pretty consistent representation of business type. So about 25% from the produce industry, from dairy, from livestock community, and then diversified operations, including maple industry, Christmas trees, and crop producers. When you look at where we see the largest number of responses, it was from Orleans, Addison, and Rutland counties. So that was where we saw the most number of survey responses submitted. Most of a growth majority of the responses are from small farms. So about 78% of the total survey responses we saw were from small farm operations. We'll see later on that more of the financial implications were experienced by large farm operations, but most number of respondents were small farms. So once this data is, this is a PDF, but when you're working in Power BI, you have the ability to sort of like click on an individual town and it will tell you how many responses were received, how many acres are impacted. So you can really kind of like manipulate the data and kind of like get very nuanced results by the way that this data will be viewed for public use probably by the end of the month. So kind of cruising through here quickly. As we had sort of expected and experienced during the flood responses, a majority of respondents do not have crop insurance. So it's 135 of our respondents didn't have insurance. We were curious, when we curated the survey questions, we used some of the same language from the 23 and 24 flood survey, so we could do some like longitudinal comparison. We added a new question around whether businesses had enrolled insurance within the last 3 years. So that was one of the questions that we had, was as a result of multiple natural disasters occurring in Vermont, has that inspired businesses to apply for NAP insurance or other crop insurance? 68% of the respondents to this survey said that they did not enroll in insurance within the last 3 years, but 22% did. So we may have had some growth in the amount of insured and covered industry representation across the state.
Matt, I think there is a correlation with the respondents, since they are smaller farm, or is it they are less likely to have insurance to the larger farms, which just do carry
Right.
insurance.
So it's a great question, Senator Major. And if you look at this next slide, so again, this is not live and manipulatable because it's a PDF, but you'd be able to put in small farm and no insurance and be able to see kind of like what that representation was across the state, or large farm and insurance, and see, you know, if that correlation is likely to be true. Yeah, that's the benefit of putting the data from the survey into Power BI, is that you can really kind of do a lot of those kind of explorations. Yeah.
How deep does that get into the relief that they saw with the crop insurance? Was there any metrics in there to say the ones that had crop insurance received X amount of dollars for that?
Oh, from previous weather events?
Or even on this event? I mean, because 22% of them had crop insurance. How did that benefit them?
It's a good question that we did not ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's what I think we found, that the produce farmer said in Huntington that the insurance paid for it, but it didn't cover anything.
Right.
We had the apple grower.
Yeah, that before.
Yeah.
We had some information as far as with that as well.
Yeah, these are the federal programs that, and it's a very complicated, you gotta do a crop by crop,
Right.
and it's a very challenging even to apply, and then the return on investment is pretty low, so that's
We
why.
know exactly, so that's,
Yeah.
just curious. The other, and I apologize, maybe you'll answer it, and maybe there's not an answer, because you can't control who responded or not. Not very many respondents from Franklin County. I mean, the biggest ag county that there is, and just not a lot that went on there. I know there's a lot of big farms there, but because they are the population of farmers that there have been some smaller farms.
Yeah, so looks like 6th or 7th largest response rate from Franklin, but not number one, not what you would think.
And this is just a theory. It was really interesting, like, it could be raining at one farm,
Right.
and then they did not get the storm
Right.
I think of Rutland County, when we were down in Rutland County visiting a lot of farms, they would see it across the lake.
Yeah.
In New York, it would be nice rain and
Wow.
it just wouldn't come. So there's a lot going on. And using the USDA formula, there were only 2 counties that didn't make the severe level of clicking the disaster declaration. The 2 counties were Franklin and Grand Isle.
Yeah.
So maybe there was in pockets adequate rain in some of those
Right.
farms, but I'm sure there are plenty in Franklin County that had, some severe issues. But that's just a theory that the only 2 that have not triggered yet will be triggered once we get the declaration, will be Franklin County and Grand Isle.
And I suppose it could be soil types too, right? The clay land makes it a lot harder. And,
Yeah, and if you look at that top chart, that is sorted by highest economic loss reported, which again, Franklin is the 5th state or 5th county down in the state, but it's this 3rd highest amount of acres impacted. So over 10,000 acres in Franklin County were impacted, just behind Rutland, and then Addison being, the largest at 24,000. So again, depending upon how you look at the impact, it could be number of respondents, it could be acres impacted, or it could be dollars of estimated loss.
Yep.
And again, in none of those cases is Franklin number 1. And I think all of those cases, Addison County was number 1. But this data is a valuable way to be able to kind of explore, how did this $15.9 million of estimated loss kind of get distributed across states across the state or across counties.
Does it also show by town? Because like in
Yes.
Addison, the more southern towns got hit with the drought worse than like Ferrisburg.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see, and then that lower chart, that is by town. So again, you can see the number of responses. And again, if this were live, this would be scrollable. It's only showing the first, 7 or 8
Okay.
towns, but it could actually scroll all the way down to the total 110 towns
Okay.
that reported from 200 different businesses. And you could be able to then click on that town on the map that would show you the number of acres that were impacted, the number of responses, and then the sum of the estimated financial loss by town. Part of the data, data clearing that we're looking to still do is there was a few very large claims that I think could be considered or at least reviewed as outliers. One of them was, what's that for me? Thank you. Thank you. One of them was from a maple operation that claimed $2 million in financial loss, both $1 million of estimated production loss and then $1 million of coping costs. I think that operation took the opportunity of a survey at the beginning of the end of the traditional growing season, but the beginning of the sugaring season to sort of identify that they're feeling quite nervous about if we didn't see any moisture kick in the fall, what the sugaring season might look like. We don't obviously know kind of the productivity of this coming sugaring season. People are tapping. We might get some runs in this little January warm up. But we really won't know the impact upon the entire maple industry until April. We know that, some operations really worried about the health of their trees based upon the limited amount of moisture they saw during the growing season. So there's some of this data, especially when we're looking at the average estimated income loss and costs incurred by farm type, that could be influenced by some of those kind of like high claims. So that's why this is still preliminary data that we haven't done kind of like all the data sorting that we'd like to do before we make it public. I will say, majority of respondents said that they need financial assistance. That's their greatest need right now. 74 respondents said that they see their financial health as moderate, which means that they see themselves vulnerable towards another event, whatever that might be, could be a snowstorm, or a, ice storm, could be the next spring season. With a flood, or could be another dry growing season that they're feeling quite vulnerable about. There were 8 businesses that responded to the survey that said that closing their business is a consideration for them. We saw, as Steve mentioned, the Sabre Dairy Farm in Shoreham that did close, did sell their cows. There was 7 other businesses that responded to this survey that are at least acknowledging that the financial hardship is putting that option on the table for them.
Do we know specifically, are they also dairy farm? Yes, I'm very.
It's a good question, and
Very concerned about the dairy.
Yeah, I think we are as well, and I think that's a way that we could sort this data.
Yeah.
One of the last questions on the survey was asking the respondent if they were comfortable with our information being their information being shared with technical service providers, and then which technical service providers were they open to us sharing their data with. So that's one of the next steps. So close the survey, finalize the data, prepare the final report, and share the information from the respondents with technical service providers to do the necessary follow-up. And I think that's the space where we could start to look which were those 8 producers, and who did they say they wanted to be in touch with? What type of primary business are they? Are they all dairy? Are they something else?
So I'm hearing that our farm resiliency bill S60 is gonna be making it out of the house. I don't know what travel path that's gonna take. It doesn't have any money in it. I think this will prove that probably some type of fund would be very, very helpful to farmers in general. Do you have any comparisons to what the flooding numbers look like as far as in losses versus the drought numbers as well? Do you?
Well, the average, so this on the left-hand side, you can see that the average financial loss per respondent is just under $80,000. And the total loss being 15.9. That's less than the losses from the floods, but about the same number of businesses that responded to the survey or that applied to the BGAP program for 23 and 24.
58 million for the losses.
For
58,
23 and
yeah.
24.
58, 23, and 24.
Okay.
And what do we see? Do we see any relief, any funding for anybody on that 58 million? Was there,
Yeah,
is
we
there a
had
percentage?
We had a state program, BGAT program that covered some of the losses. Ag was part of that program.
You gave us the numbers last year, I think.
Yeah.
It was good, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I think
Great.
it was 7 million combined that BGAP put out for ag over the 2-year period, but I can email you
And they
the
were only eligible for 30% of their losses, if I remember correctly, on the BGAP.
30% of physical losses.
So this is very helpful information to us as we, again, in a tight budget year. I don't see where the money's gonna come from, but we certainly wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't put a pitch in. And so to be able to compare and have that analysis would be very helpful to us because we're gonna take a shot at it.
Great. That makes sense to compare. There are some similarities and I think a variety of differences between how businesses responded and have experienced loss from the drought growing season versus the 2 different flooding event years. But I think there's some interesting comparisons there. One of the questions we asked in the survey was around the most detrimental impacts from the flood. And the top 3 responses have been consistent from the first kind of onslaught of responses. Lower crop yields for market, lower crop yields for feed, and insufficient pasture for forage. So again, some of the quick stories that we heard from businesses, they lost crops that resulted in a loss of gross income, in some cases in the hundreds of thousands of dollars range by reported businesses. We heard that corn ears were small, crops didn't germinate, or crops died in the field. Either they were insufficiently irrigated or they didn't have irrigation that reached the full extent of their farm, or they simply didn't have irrigation and the drought had been a condition that the farm had planned for. One of the concerns primarily in the dairy industry is acknowledging the additional feed supplement that they need to purchase, having not been able to grow what they had anticipated on farm. And then having to take out loans to purchase that additional feed and worrying about the debt service on those loans, given the milk prices going into winter. So that's all kind of like formulating into the perfect storm that the industry was really worried about. We knew that they were going to have feed shortages, and that sort of started to play at the beginning of the growing season. So we actually had like very wet conditions at the beginning of this growing season. So a lot of first cut was very delayed because fields were wet, and then it got really dry. And a lot of operations were not able to take a second cut, or if they did, it came off really late or it was really low yield. So that was a condition that kind of like was pretty ubiquitously experienced across the state, not every town and not for every operation, but across every county. 125 producers responded to the survey that they anticipate feed shortages. And we're continuing to field some of those calls and get some of those questions from the industry. Still, that businesses are concerned about being able to feed their animals going through winter, or being able to find a supplemental feed source that they can afford or that they can even access to feed their animals. So we heard from producers that were, hauling feed out of Minnesota and Wisconsin because that was the closest they could find. Their sources in New York and Pennsylvania that they typically purchased from also had experienced drought and didn't have feed supply.
And then the price was higher too because of.
They had to pay for trucking. Yeah. And it was just like more, market works that way, and that they're just like a more premium demand because people were looking for feed. The last piece, I guess, on this detrimental impact would be on pasture ground. So a lot of producers rely upon their pasture as stockpiled feed into the fall to be able to delay when they have to start feeding, put up feed. That didn't happen for many operations because they just didn't have the pastures. So they didn't have the fall feed. They didn't have the pasture ground, and again, resulted in that need for additional purchase feed. In some cases, businesses sold animals. So they culled animals or sold animals simply because they didn't see that they had the budget or the means to be able to feed them through the winter. In some cases, that was part of their business plan. In other cases, that wasn't part of the plan, and they sold at a low price, or they sold, at an age and stage of development for the animal that they hadn't anticipated, which will have lasting kind of like implications on the viability and revenue generation of that business. A lot of this data can be sorted, as we were saying, in comparing. 59% of survey respondents said this was the worst drought they've ever experienced. We can sort that by business size. Looks like large farm operations feel that most acutely. We can also sort that by business type. It seems pretty consistent that whether you're a dairy farm or a produce operation, about 50 to 60% of businesses felt that this was the worst drought they've ever seen. And if it's not the worst, which is the red, the gross majority of that then say it was a significant event, maybe not the worst they'd ever seen, but it was a big deal in Vermont. Yeah. And that's why when you looked at national trends, and you all knew this, but there were times when Vermont was the most impacted drought state in the country, like above New Mexico, above Arizona and Texas. Unusual position for our state to be. We haven't seen that kind of drought conditions, in quite a few years. There's a lot more that we can talk about in greater detail about kind of what businesses did in the short term in response to losing their water source. So either seeing their irrigation or their water sources running dry or at least running low, as well as how they responded to their feed shortages. So there's a variety of conversations here that I'm going to just kind of glaze over for now in respect of time, but we can certainly share more on these details when we have the final report.
How long was the survey? Did it take them to complete the survey? Would you expect?
I think it was open for 2 months, October 17th to December 15th, and I think we expected that the average response time was about 10 minutes.
Okay.
It wasn't a long survey. I think there were 38 questions, but many of those were pretty simple about, business type, your location, size of your farm, what
Right.
crops do you grow.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of data.
Yeah, there is a lot of data. Yeah, so it'll take us a little bit to kind of sort through it and pull out the most.
Thank you for the way you've got that laid out, though. It's very easy to read, very.
Yeah, Power BI is great in that way. We have a few really exceptional data gurus at the agency that can kind of sort through and visualize this really well. We're grateful for. Just to share with you what businesses said that they need. So again, 50% of them said they need financial assistance. That's the most critical piece. But they also noted they're really worried about surface water recovery and what things are going to look like for next growing season. They're concerned about their soil health and whether the drought conditions will linger and affect their pastures or their crops for next year. Businesses, if part of that financial assistance need is looking at investment in irrigation systems. So businesses that didn't have irrigation or didn't have sufficient of their irrigation system are looking at expanding that.
Good.
Some businesses are looking at drilling new wells. Some businesses drilled new wells throughout the season, if they could get a hold of a well driller. They're looking at exploring different drought tolerant species, whether that's for like perennial pastures or even for their annual crop varieties that they might be putting in place for next growing season. A lot of just acknowledged emotional and mental health toil, having been impacted by multiple events in consecutive years. And I'll show one last slide that speaks to that, the number of businesses that were impacted by multiple events over the last 3 years. And then we still have to wait and see, like, what will be the impact on the maple industry? What about our Christmas trees and other horticultural crops that might be more of the perennial nature, to see how they fare next season. This is the last slide to show. So this is where you can see that 75% of the survey respondents were impacted by previous major weather events. Only 25% of those were impacted by one other significant event, which means the majority of those were impacted by more than one previous natural weather event of significant nature. So that was going back to the frost of 2023 all the way through the spring rains of 2025. So I think part of what we're concerned about is just the cumulative effect on the businesses, withstanding, the flooding impacts, their business still being in recovery, a pretty wild growing season in 25, starting with rains and then ending in drought, as well as many of the same things that Steve Collier was mentioning and thinking about cost of inputs, tariffs, trade, and other impacts for their business. So that's what we have to share with you today.
Well, very nice. We look forward to that. I do, at least.
Yeah.
And yeah, very nice.
Great.
Well, thank you guys very much. As
Thank you
always,
very much.
very informative, and we like.
Paul, if you need anything.
Well, we like to stay online.
Well,
Yeah.
And,
Are we still meeting today?
if you'd like, we can.
Were you planning on?
Yeah,
Okay. Then no,
yeah, yeah.
no.
Yeah. Thank
Thank you for the cough drop.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
I'll see you this afternoon, the big.
Yeah, you will. Yeah, that too.
Under the big dome.
Had a wonderful time down here at county, like we feel. I went to, something called the GOAT Project.
Mhm.
We supported her. She's got, I've got great, she's going, wanted to make a good goat cheese. And then so I went to Kildene and learned about the heritage breed there, which is a fascinating story. I got to follow up with them. They're looking for, if anyone wants to make cheese, they've got that. It's on pause now. They're looking for a cheese maker.
They're looking for cheese.
and they've got the goats already. They just need, the goats are there. They just need some sheets. And then went to Maple Brook.
Yeah.
And they're continuing to innovate, and do things like something to do with butter. It's gonna be coming out, which is kind of fun. And then with Christmas trees, going to Powell and a Christmas tree and talked with our friend. He also has the place in Bennington as well.
There are a couple of places.
Yeah, so it was a great day.
Very good.
It was a great day.
Yeah. Was that during the council for the?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got through a little bit of that.
Yeah.
We worked in a state building. We go to the vets.
See, they pretty cool. And they pick on me because I get to go. All I do is eat my way through the county.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, and everyone else has got, your world.
More of a heads up. I think we had days to
Yeah.
get ready for
I know it's
We need to go for things.
but it was a good day.
Yeah.
I had a colleague that used to say that it's a good day when you go on a road you've never been on before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
And I went in multiple of those
Yeah.
events, so, when you get off at 7.
Yeah.
See what's going on. There's this one, a lot of nice backgrounds. GPS. You never know what's gonna take. I've got the class 4s, the back end of class 4s and like, no, I'm not going through the pasture with that little car of mine. Gonna have to reroute this thing. Down in Haven. Our community run. Not few.
Oh, yeah, that's how, yep,
Yeah.
yeah, they got
Couple follow. You ever get that road issue figured out? With the flying spot with the school buses? You hear about that?
No, I didn't, that's, in New Haven?
Yeah, they got, apparently, there's the school. And what it might be, is it 116?
Yeah,
They have
17.
17, they have to cross.
And that has that hedgerow right there, so.
Yeah, and the way the road goes, it's like, people are going really fast. So I think we were working on trying to get them one of those either flashing.
Yeah, the one you push.
So that was one of the things we were hoping we were able to solve it over there. Because that was one of the guys on the fire department was saying he leads his kids across the street. He won't let them cross, just the road thing.
Because they're supposed to be doing 35, but no.
Oh, no. You want to go back?
Sure.
Let's do it. Very over.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
having us.
Thank you very much. Yes. No, just for a second. We'll beat it here. So I make a lot of characterizations about what our committee is. So if you guys disagree with that, certainly pipe in and go. But I think I'm fairly accurate as far as how we feel about things. So, again, we got a very expansive list as far as what I've laid out, and I don't know what we're gonna get to. We might get to some of it, none of it, all of it, or as things come before us. I think there's gonna be a lot of long-ranging discussions to be had that probably won't be settled in this session. And so maybe none of us will be around to settle any of it, but I think a lot of the conversations need to get started. And I think lots of times as Secretary Attendance has said that these people that are out there with their hands in the soil need to understand that they have advocates in the State House who are willing to swing for them. So a lot of that goes on with that. I like that presentation they just did. I thought that was nice. So, and as it said, we're going to take a swing at 60. I don't see any money anywhere, but we certainly have more information available to us now to advocate for the reason why there should be money in there. And there will never be enough. But with agriculture bringing $9.2 billion into the state, I think that you can't milk a cow and not expect to give away a little bit of cheese when it's all said and done. So that's that. Anything else?
no,
Sir.